Are you kidding me? That's what?
Yeah, every so often it happens that Ryan is right.
100% right. Not even a little bit right.
Tucker Pullman, 2 points last game.
No kidding. My man.
Hey, neither does me running shirtless, but that turned out very well.
Welcome to the PP1 podcast.
Wow. This is going to be a big night. We're talking hockey. Get all the intros out of the way. This is Ryan on the PP1 podcast. My buddy Ted will be back next week. He says heart surgery recovery is going. He says hi to everybody. But we've got bigger things to talk about. We've got the Dave Jackson, now of ESPN, which has got to sound pretty nice. Former NHL referee, over 1,500 games. We're going to get into all that kind of stuff. But first and foremost, Dave, thank you so much for coming by.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to have somebody even want to talk to an ex-referee. So appreciate the offer.
It's hockey. I mean, I think everybody just wants to talk the game, and we get to see kind of your side of the ice. You just finished covering Oilers and Avalanche tonight. What was that like?
Well, it was a long night. Just took my tie off. Started at 5 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock East Coast time. We had the Maple Leafs and the Tampa Bay Lightning, which was a first round preview.
Yeah.
And it did not disappoint. It was fireworks from start to finish. And it was just a real fun game to watch and to be part of. And I just hope that they have that energy going next week when they meet up and play each other, because it was a lot of fun. And then, of course, we watched McDavid and Draisaitl against McKinnon and the Avs, and it was 2-1 overtime game for Edmonton, but it could have gone either way. It was just low scoring, lots of chances, some good goaltending. It was just a lot of fun.
So, I mean, we're all getting excited for the playoffs, and as a referee, I'm sure you guys had a different excitement. I'm sure because it's still the Stanley Cup playoffs, and it doesn't matter if you're watching it from home, if you happen to be lucky enough to be a player on the ice or referee. What did you get excited for when it came to the playoffs? Like, I'm sure your hype was a little different, obviously.
Well, I tell you what, you still have to make the playoff team every year, just like teams. Just because the Avs won the cup last year, they're not guaranteed to make the playoff. Well, they are now, but looking back there a couple months ago, I mean, they were out of playoff contention. And as referees, you're only as good as your last call on your body of work that season. So you have to perform in order to get into playoffs. So it comes late in the season. You sure don't want to have any hiccups in your game. And our playoffs, mentally, you start preparing, a month in, going like, make sure you do a good job, because only a little over half the staff get playoffs. There's 36 referees, 36 linesmen, and only 20 of each get into the playoffs. So really, that's when you start ramping up and going, I just hope I make the playoff team. I mean, that's first and foremost.
And do they tell you, is it, I guess, the same as the last day of the season, or do you kind of have an idea maybe like a week prior? How does that work?
No, officially, you don't find out until the final game of the season.
Okay.
I mean, I know I had 1 or 2 years in my career where I kind of knew, but it was, knew in a bad way. But I just had that gut feeling that you just, you'd had some controversy, and you'd come back from an injury and you missed some time, and it just wasn't going to be your year. But for the most part, even I think when you're a veteran and you're pretty sure you're getting playoffs, it's still nice. You're still excited to open that email and see your name on the list.
No kidding. Now, I tried going through all of your Wikipedia and the NHL official website. I couldn't find it. Have you reffed a Stanley Cup final?
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I was having a good night till now.
Oh boy. All right. Well, we can cut this, and it is live, unfortunately.
No,
so.
you know what? I didn't. And obviously it was a disappointment, but it's not something I look back on in my career and just, I'm not going to wallow in self-pity. My first 7 years on staff, I was back in the one referee system.
Right. Okay.
And so when I was hired, I think I was the 12th referee on staff. Like, we only had 12 referees.
Okay.
And 11 worked playoffs, and they were all more senior than me. So in fact, I believe we had it in the contract then that if you didn't work playoffs when you'd already been in playoffs 2 years in a row, you were subject to maybe be dismissed. So unless somebody really screwed up, there was no way And I knew that. I mean, they assigned me standby and everything. So I spent 7 years um, of my career where some guys break into playoffs much sooner now.
Right.
I didn't, and then I had, like I said, I had a couple lean years where just you had controversy follow you around. You didn't get it. There were other years I got to the third round. I'm working Game 6 and semifinals, and you think it's your year, and
Yeah.
only four, like now 5 guys referee the finals. Back then it was only 4 guys,
Okay.
and so you've gone from 30 at the time it was 34 referees. You go to top 8 work in the semifinals, and then from 8 you move to 4, and just it was never my year. I mean, yeah, it was disappointment, but I don't think I never felt that somebody uh, was not deserving and that I got unfairly kept out. I mean,
Right.
I just got outworked by 4 guys that worked better than I did, and everything is so subjective at that level, and just one call here or there, and
Right.
it just goes the other way. But I fooled them for 32 years and over 1,500 games, and
Worked out okay.
yeah, it worked out okay.
I mean, I don't want to focus on that. That was only one question. I mean, your body of work does speak for itself. No big deal. Just being an officiating crew for the Olympics. All-Star game. We got the outdoor game in 2016. Just a few minor things. In a long career, right? But I mean, those are still pretty impressive. I mean, you may not get to play in the NHL as a hockey player, but those are still pretty impressive things. So my one question, because I don't know why I love the NHL All-Star Game so much, but I still do, even though
Sure.
it's lost a lot of its glamour. What's officiating an All-Star Game like? Being that, I mean, we all see it on TV. There's not a lot going on there. There's not a lot of
No,
substance.
there's not. But I like the fact that you like the All Star game because I hate people bashing the All Star game. It's really, I mean, it's not supposed to be a contest with a bunch of fights and body checks. I mean, that's you get the NHL playoffs for it. They're
Yeah.
exciting. The NHL All Star game it's an ode to celebrating the star power of the league, recognizing the star power, letting them express themselves and have some fun, letting their families experience it, and letting the fans and the sponsors that want to be part of the All Star game be part of it. If you don't like it, don't watch it.
Right.
Go somewhere else. But I think you're doing yourself a disservice, especially the skills competition.
Yeah.
When you see what those guys are doing, so as an official, you're right. The referee, you really, although my I was fortunate enough to work 2 All Star games, and my first one in LA in 2002. Jeremy Roenick laid this massive body check very first shift of the game. And the guy really wasn't expecting to get hit, and it caused a bit of shoving, and everybody was kind of looking around, going like,
Yeah. What do we
"What are
do?
what are you doing, Jr.? I mean, come on, we're not out here to get hurt."
Yeah.
But the skills, like as an official, you get, I believe, I got you get 10 tickets, so
Okay.
you can bring your family, your extended family, and for me, as an official, I mean, it's a lonely existence. You're on the road up to 20 days a month,
Right.
and you don't travel with your crew. You travel on your own. Your family makes so many sacrifices. You miss holidays, you miss birthdays, you miss school plays, and
Hmm.
have the ability to bring your family to an all-star game. See, like my game I did in LA, my daughter hadn't been born yet, but my 2 sons were there. They were like 10 and 8. And during a skills competition, the breakaway competition, I look over and both of them are sitting on the players bench with like team jerseys on. My older son, he was sitting beside Tommy Salo, the goaltender. They were sharing
Yeah.
popcorn and they were just talking. And my younger son was standing, and the late Pat Quinn, had his arm around him because he had a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey on.
Yeah.
And Pat Quinn was giving my 8-year-old the finer points of the breakaway competition. And, my younger son was listening to Tommy Salo explain how to stop a
Yeah.
breakaway.
Yeah.
And when they weren't there, they had their badge around their neck and they were running in and out of the locker room. I mean, they had on like Patrick Waugh's equipment, Mario Lemieux's equipment, Rob Blake's. They were just, I mean, you know,
You're
they
in
were
your
in heaven.
element.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was so much fun to see the smiles on your kids' faces. And then my daughter was able to experience the one I did in 18 in my final year, which is down in Tampa. My boys came as well, and they were a little older. They were able to have some beers and stuff and have fun at the All Star weekend. And
Yeah.
it was just, my wife came, and they just, it's just like a reward type of thing to
For sure.
for putting in the time and for just being consistent and getting the game. It's a lot of fun.
So when you're on the ice there and the game's kind of happening, like, did any of the players kind of come up and like tell you, like, this is what I'm going to do? I want to get a penalty called on me, like, just cause a little bit of ruckus in the game?
Not really. I think in the 2 games I did, I didn't call a penalty. I've never called penalty in an All-Star game, and I
You'd
believe
be remembered for all the wrong
well,
reasons.
I believe I worked at Wes McCauley, and he called 1 penalty in that game. So in 2 full games, I've had 1 penalty on the ice, and
There you go.
it's just not something that really happens. And you don't really want to have to call a penalty, but at the same time, you don't want to miss one. I mean, if it's obvious,
Yeah.
you're there for a reason. I mean,
Yeah.
you're there to referee the hockey game. So if something
Yeah.
happens, you call it. But I mean, the players kind of police themselves a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it'd be kind of nice if they were allowed to do a little bit more of that these days. I want to keep it light because I kind of hurt your feelings at the beginning here. Best chirp that either you've had happen to you or that you've heard on the ice. And I mean, if there's more than one, this is what
Well,
we're here for.
I mean, I always sort of say most the chirps, the really good ones, are not safe for work, and keep this family G rated here. But I'm thinking, I mean, there's a couple of just funny ones where
We have an extended audience. You don't have to worry.
my first year in the league, I was in the old Boston Garden, and this rookie came in for Boston and stepped across the blue line and just buried a snapshot, went crossbar down. The goalie never moved, and it was the kid's first goal. We get back to center ice, and this longtime veteran Peter Duris was at center ice for the Bruins. And I'm standing there with the puck waiting for the guys to line up. And I looked at Peter. I went, you know what, Peter, that play there reminds me of when I was a kid, when I was younger. And he just looked at me with a straight face and went, "What? You were a goaltender?" And just lighthearted. I remember I used to wear a iTech helmet for a couple years.
Okay. Yeah.
Not the ugly one, the better looking iTech helmet. Although
Uh-huh.
some
Uh-huh.
guys told me it looked ugly, but I was doing a game in the old Igloo, and it was Pittsburgh Philly, and it was quite a rivalry, and they were yelling at each other, and it was right before playoffs. They were setting the tone, and I mean, it was a nasty game, lots of penalties, and during a stoppage, I forget who the player was. I know Mike Stothers was the assistant coach for Philly at the time, and he was standing right by the end. And these players were like they were yelling at each other from the benches about who made more money, and they were like they were veterans were like yelling at this like American leaguer that came up and just making fun of him how much he was making, whatever.
Yeah.
And I can remember the line, and at the time, because to me it was a lot of money. Somebody was like, you're only making 400 grand, he said to the guy, and the guy didn't really know what to say to that. So I turned around. I just joined in. I said, 400 grand. I go, I make that for wearing this helmet. So Mike Stuther starts to really laugh, right? And so we just laugh and we go along and everything. And player comes up to me 2 minutes later. He goes, "Hey, Jax, you seriously make 400K for wearing that helmet?"
Oh man. Yeah.
I just like that. I go, "No, I don't. I don't make anything for wearing this helmet. Come on." But
That's great. That's
they
great.
it just sort of everybody sort of stopped. There was this big argument, and they found that I was making all this money for wearing a helmet. It was kind
Yeah.
of funny. Yeah.
That's awesome. I kind of want actually to kind of carry over from the All-Star game. You did the Stadium Series, Detroit, Colorado in
Mhm.
2016. The
Yes.
sounds are obviously way different than an NHL arena. You're open air, you're in a stadium. Obviously, you're going to have to adapt your game as well. It's not you're not having to worry about you know corralling the puck and trying to make sure that the ice is all good. Like how is your game adapted in an outdoor game compared to a normal arena?
You know what? To be quite honest, I had no preconceived notions of what it would be. To me, I was assigned the game. I mean, I just moved to Denver. Myself and Brad Watson, who also lives in Denver,
Right.
we were both senior guys at the time, so we got assigned the game. Our families were there, and the weather was beautiful. It was 68 degrees at puck drop, and we were wondering how the ice was going to be. And I tell you what, credit to Jet Ice and the guys that you know run that whole thing back at the time. I mean, we got on that ice. That's some of the best ice I ever skated on.
Hmm.
Rivaled the best ice of any indoor rink. I'm not sure how they did it, but it was that good. And we'd done a pregame skate the night before. You got to bring your family out, so I had 15 people with me, and we skated around. And it was kind of neat because I go to a lot of baseball games, watch Rockies games, and but the building was empty, and it was like you said, it was very vast, and
Yeah.
um, so the next day I didn't really think the atmosphere was going to be that cool. But I'll tell you what, we got out there, and that stadium was packed. I don't know what it holds, like 50 grand. We had the F-18s come over top and during the anthem, and when that puck dropped, it didn't matter where I was. It
Back to hockey.
was it was just focused. I was just focused on the game. And I think that's how most referees get, because I always get asked, do you get to watch greatness? I mean, I was on the ice with Wayne Gretzky, one of the all-time best, Mario Lemieux, guys like that. Do you get to watch their talent? And you go, I'm just afraid of missing a penalty. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
You're
just
still
out
there to
here.
do a job.
You're there to do a job,
Yeah.
and people go, well, what about when someone in the crowd chirps you and stuff? Like, you really don't hear the crowd,
Yeah.
even in the indoor games. You hear like as a roar when the whole rink is yelling, ref, you
Yeah.
suck or something like that. But as far as individual chirps and things, the glass is so high, you really don't hear that. I mean, people would be amazed at how much you can hear on the ice, like communication, D-man talking to D-man and stuff, even when the crowd's loud,
It's pretty
because for
crisp.
some reason that sound just sort of filters up into the rafters, and the glass is high. You're kind of in a bubble down on the ice, and you're able to communicate with people. You're able to yell at players and tell them to keep their stick down, or don't use your hands, things like that. And
Yeah.
so being out on the in the baseball field, really didn't realize uh, where I was. I mean, you did during stoppages, but when that puck drops, you're just focused. You're just focused and making sure you don't miss a penalty and just do your job.
Yeah, I think my big wonder was, I mean, yeah, you're definitely right. When you're on the ice, everybody thinks that, I don't know why so many people think that you can hear them when you're in the crowd, but you can't.
Yeah,
When you're on the ice, it's so just involved. I just figured maybe at a bigger stadium, but you're kind of saying with the higher glass, everything kind of stays in there. So that's interesting. As big as those
it,
stadiums are,
yeah,
it's
it really,
interesting that you still kind of hear everything.
I mean, it's the sounds of the game that you're hearing, regardless in the big outdoor rink or in the indoor rink. It's the sounds of the game. Puck off the boards, skates, the benches, coaches yelling at you, players, puck off the goalpost. It's just the sounds of the game, and that doesn't really
Interesting.
change much. Yeah.
Interesting. This is actually a question that my wife gave me because she's a lot smarter than I am. And then when she asked, I thought, oh yeah, that's a great question. So when you guys have your training camp, I'm just like everybody else does. Are there calls that the NHL kind of? I remember when hooking came out right after the lockout, that was a
Yeah.
big thing that you guys were supposed to kind of focus on and make sure that was tried to move out of the game. Is there
I
kind of
did.
something
And
that you
did we
guys look
ever?
at? Yeah, it was. I do remember those first that first month and a half. It was. There was a
The
lot of penalties from
the
what I remember.
preseason, I remember calling. I think we had 25 minor penalties one game in the preseason, and
Oh, that's
players were
exhausting.
saying this isn't going to work, and we're telling, oh, it's going to work. In the back of my head, we're saying it's not going to work.
Yeah. So
But it
like,
did.
is
But
do
it
you
did
guys
work,
call
and we stayed
something
with
every
it.
year? Like, do you find something like does the NHL kind of say like, listen, we've noticed an increase in this, or is there something that kind of sticks out even to you guys as a group of referees that you thought, hey, we really noticed that this was going on? Is this something that maybe we can try to curb a little bit next season or coming up this season?
That does happen, and it doesn't come from the referees. It comes from hockey operations.
Right.
It comes from the GMs. The GMs have summer meetings and things, or sometimes it's just something that's noticed by the officiating department. Stephen Walkham. Um, One of the best examples in the last few years, 2 years ago, was the cross checking.
Hmm.
3 years ago in the playoffs, or I guess 2 years ago in the two playoffs ago, there was several incidents where there was unpenalized cross-checking, and when you're in the game, you don't really realize what becomes acceptable to the outside world. That's what's acceptable in the game, and
Hmm.
that's sort of what it comes to, and the players accept it, and the referees accept it. It just comes a certain way. But there was this outrage from the fans, and there was some. I mean, there were some egregious cross checks that weren't called, and there was a real focus, if you remember, when the season began last year, that they were going to clamp down on cross checking, which they did. And the first month and a half of the season, there was a whole ton of cross-checking penalties, but guess what? You don't see it anymore.
Mhm.
And when it does happen now, it's called consistently. And I don't think anybody ever wasn't calling the blatant cross-check in front of the net. It was the sneaky ones where, you're chasing a guy and you put the stick on the back of his pants and you give him
Right.
that little quick little shove like that, and down the guy goes, his feet hit the boards. It's a
Mhm.
dangerous play. And I wasn't at their training camp 2 years ago, but I was told that that was a focus, and it wasn't a secret. I mean, they told all the players, told the GMs, this is what we're going to focus on. They made videos. The referees watched the videos. 2 years before that, or possibly my final season in 17, 18, it was the slashing, like the sticks on
Right.
the gloves. I
Mhm.
mean, everybody calls the lumberjack swings, but
Yeah.
we were you couldn't hook somebody. So instead of hooking him, you give him a little whack on the hand, and players were breaking their fingers. So now I think what's really important too is when you'll see a lot of times where a penalty is called for a slash on the stick. And
Right.
a lot of people get frustrated at that and go, you know, what's hockey coming to? You slash on the stick. But what they
Or
don't
if it was a
realize,
wooden stick, it wouldn't have broke kind of thing.
correct, but what they don't realize, it's not the slash on the stick that bothers the GMs and hockey ops. It's the fact that it's not a hockey play. You're not trying to play the puck.
Mhm.
You're still 2.5 feet from the puck. It's up high on the shaft.
Yeah.
What you're doing is it's an intimidation play, and if you don't time it and don't do it exactly the way it should be, you're going to break a guy's finger. And the GMs pay big money to these guys to showcase their skills. They don't want them sitting in the stands with broken hands.
No
So
kidding.
the reason that those are called is not because the guy drops his stick when he doesn't even have the puck. They're called as a deterrent so guys are not slashing near the hands
Hmm.
and guys aren't breaking fingers. And that's why those penalties are called.
So again, I want to get back to playoffs here because I can't wait. Even though our Vancouver Canucks, and I speak our on our side of the screen here, our Canucks will not be in, but hopefully we can get back in next season, maybe with that Bedard fellow. Just kidding. That's not going to happen. Um, we all know, or I'm sure you guys know as well, and as a fan, the global fan base of hockey, we all know that once the playoffs start, things appear to be called a little bit differently, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, where calls maybe either we perceive are missed or whether it has to be kind of blatant, and obviously that steps up, I think, in the Stanley Cup final. It appears as well. How does that go through your guys' head when it comes to the playoffs? Because it feels like, and there was plenty of games that we can look at that you get into a game, you think, well, how come they called that all season? And it really looks like they're kind of letting that extra little bit go. And I get it is a more intense time of year, and there's a lot more on the line in over a 7-game series, and you don't want to make a
Sure.
call that costs a series. At the same time, there's years, and again, as a Canucks fan, I'm sure we've got a few we could probably talk about. I can't remember any specific ones, but a call that maybe does get missed or that's called that wouldn't have been called in the regular season. It's a tough question. I don't know how to get there exactly, but um, how do you guys get there in the
Sure.
playoff?
Well, let's go back to training camp. Training camp, Stephen Walkham, who's the director of officiating, he'll stand up in front of that group and he'll harp on it for the 4 or 5 days they're there. Mr. Bettman will show up for a visit. You just stay a couple hours, just as rally the troops and say, we appreciate what you guys do and everything. And every year I was there, would hear them tell us, you guys know what the standard is. We've shown you 3 days of videos on slashing, hooking, holding, boarding. We've shown you videos on it. We've had
Right.
discussions on it. You guys know what the standard is. People talk about consistency. Consistency is an overused word because you could go out and be consistently bad. You
Right.
go out and call nothing, call no penalties for
That's
either
fair.
team, and you're still consistent. But are
Mhm.
you good? No, I mean, you're not. So let's try to avoid consistency and say be true to the standard. And they spend hours upon hours of showing you what the standard is. For example, on body checks, boardings,
Mhm.
they'll show a video of 25 instances that are boarding.
Right.
But then they'll show 25 more of good body checks. We don't want these called penalties. This is a good body check so that the guys know the difference. And by doing that, you're able to sort of formulate in your head a standard. That's what the standard is.
Okay.
And Mr. Bettman will say to guys, I don't care what the score is. I don't care what time of the year it is. If it meets the standard, you call a penalty and you'll be supported. And that's all they've ever told the referees at training camp. You call a penalty that meets the standard and you'll be supported. So you fast forward,
Mhm.
it goes on through a year, and there's penalties that are missed, but there's also penalties that are called that maybe don't quite meet the standard,
Right.
right? And why are those called? Well, usually it's sight lines, because if you have the wrong sight line, it looks like a penalty. So you call it, and then you look at after the game and you go, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't have called that.
Right.
And for the same reason, you get your game on a laptop after the game's over. You can review all your penalties. There's
Mhm.
notes in there from the situation room in Toronto about take a look at this penalty. We're not sure it was up to standard. They have in-house supervisors that travel around the league. They're retired officials. They're called mentors or coaches,
Okay.
and their job's to evaluate, because at the end of the season, you shorten the staff down to the 20 playoff performers. So they all have input on that, but they're also there to mentor and coach. And as a referee, you don't have that much time to watch other people's hockey games. So you only kind of know what your belief is in the standard. And that's why they're there to tell you, hey, listen, you're on standard. Those were all penalties you called tonight. Or they come down and go, listen, your hooking and holding standard, it's too loose or it's too tight. You called 2 or 3 tonight that you probably, if you get a better look at them, you're not going to call them, because yes, the stick was there, the hand was there, but there was no result.
Right.
You still has to be a result. If you're going to put your hand up, you need to restrain the guy. Just because the
Yeah.
hand is there doesn't mean it's a penalty. Just because the stick, and it drives me nuts when you hear some announcers say, well, the stick was horizontal to the ice, so they're going to call that every time. No, there still has to be an act of restraining the guy with the stick, right? So sometimes you see penalties that are called throughout the season that I'd say most of them are penalties, but there's going to be times where there's not. And guys reference, well, I saw that called this season, and now it's not called in the playoffs. Well, maybe the sight lines, it could have been ignored. So now you come to playoffs, and the players play a completely different game
Oh,
in
absolutely.
playoffs,
Yeah.
right? The you largely eliminate the lazy penalties, because players who commit a lazy penalty often sit on the end of the bench for the remainder, especially if
Yeah.
the team gets
No,
scored
you're
on, right?
absolutely right. Yeah.
Goals are hard to come by. So you've got to be mindful and not take the lazy penalties. The retaliation penalties largely go away in the playoffs because coaches harp on their players. Take his number, remember it, get him back later. Don't retaliate, because the referees are going to see that.
Mhm.
So you've gotten rid of the lazy penalties and retaliation penalties, and that's on the players. I mean, they're good for them. That's discipline. That's on the coaches imparting that on their players. So what you're left with in playoffs is usually um, accidental penalties, to where you're competing and you're trying to poke the puck, you're trying to do whatever, you end up tripping a guy, or desperation penalties where you don't want to give up a goal.
Yeah.
So
You
it's
get you'll
desperation.
take one anyway. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of the other penalties, I think, fall into, you say you're not calling it. Well, a lot of the other ones are maybe cases where, because let's face it, in hockey, it's such a gray area, the game of hockey,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
right? I mean, I,
That's a fair statement.
I could show you 10 plays right now where a guy's a semi breakaway and the defenseman catches him. And if they all go against the Canucks, you might go 10 for 10 saying those are missed penalties. But if it's another fan and that's his team with the puck, they're all going to go, those were great defensive plays.
Exactly.
Great
Yeah.
defensive plays. So people say, hey, just call the rule book black and white. That's really tough to do, because there really is no black and white in hockey penalties. It's all judgment. It's all judgment. So when referees get to the playoffs, they want to keep the game fair. They want to keep it safe. They want to make sure there's no scoring chances taken away. And they focus on those 3 things. If there's ancillary stuff, a guy is pushing a guy away, maybe interfering with him a little bit, and it's away from the puck,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we want to focus on taking away scoring chances, anything
Sure.
dangerous,
Yeah.
and anything that's unfair. So
Fair
I
enough.
think there's a, and if you look at the numbers, don't really bear out. If you look at penalties per game, I actually went through this last spring. Penalties per game, on the most part, are actually slightly higher in the playoffs than they are in regular season,
No kidding.
which is mind blowing to think of, but it really is because you don't have you. I mean, in a regular season game, there's a lot of games where there's only 3 or 4 penalties.
Right.
There's nothing on the line. The game might be a blowout, and the team's,
Yeah. They're not
the
good.
game's
Yeah.
half over. The compete level's not there sometimes.
Right.
In the playoffs, the compete levels are dropping a puck till the final buzzer,
Mm-hmm.
and guys are committing infractions. The infractions they commit, I find, are more obvious because it's to save a goal. It's to
A little more
stop
blatantly, you can kind of
a
figure it out at that
little
point.
more blatant, and
Mhm.
those are called. And sure, there's going to be penalties that are missed, but I really don't think. I think people make a bigger deal about it in the playoffs because a missed penalty that really should be called and isn't, well, there's a power play opportunity that goes away.
Mhm.
And if it's a 1-0 game, those power play opportunities are big. So
Absolutely.
I don't think any more penalties. I mean, the nature of the game is calls will get missed, and you don't want referees guessing. I mean, if you're unsure of something, if it's like we said, a 50-50 play where it's
Yeah.
um, is it a great defensive play or did he hook him home? And you're not sure. Well, the consequence of calling one and being wrong is a lot more than going, well, it wasn't blatant,
Yeah.
and I'm really not sure. And there are penalties like that, but if it's a blatant call that's missed,
Yeah.
no one feels worse than the referee,
Oh, sure.
and no one's going out there to miss penalties because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but in the playoffs, a supervisor is assigned to the entire series,
Yep.
and every game the referees working that night. The referees seldom work 2 games in the same series unless they're back for game 7.
Mhm.
They will come in to that city and they'll get the intel from the supervisor. This is what happened last night or 2 nights ago. Um, this team A was really crowding the crease. They were in there. They bumped the goalie a couple of times, and nothing's a secret. The supervisor goes to the skate that morning, talks to the GMs, and says, "Listen, there was too much bumping of the goal. There was the crowd in the crease. I'm making the officials aware that this is something that they need to have their antenna up for, and just
Mhm.
beware of it. You don't want to prejudge a game, but you
Right.
want to make sure they're aware of what's happening."
Right.
Same as if there's been late hits or there's scrums. I mean, sometimes you'll see a game that gets a little bit out of hand scrum wise. There'll be
Mhm.
too many scrums
Right.
and it won't get taken care of. Well, the supervisor goes to the rink 2 days later. Listen, I think you guys will agree there's too many scrums last night. So I'm going to advise the referees that we need to address that.
Mhm.
And we'll tell the referees, listen, if there's scrums, you give them a warning. If they continue, we want you to deal with them. Maybe call just one guy and that'll settle things down. Because if you call doubles all night, it's really not. There's no
Yeah.
return to that,
You're
right?
still
So
keeping it even. They'll just keep
right.
doing
So
scrums. Exactly.
you'll call one guy, but if you tell the GMs that, they'll tell their coaches, who'll tell their players, and you go out and there's a scrum. It's incumbent upon the referee to do what he said he was going to do, and
Right.
then call that scrum, and it usually settles things down. So um, I know it's been a long-winded roundabout about question, but
Well, I
um,
asked the long one, so I'm willing to take the long answer.
yeah,
That's great.
I mean, I really don't think um, that referees change their mindset. They want to call penalties if they're penalties.
Right.
And I just think when a penalty gets missed, which they do happen, there's just a way more focus on it than you'd see in middle of October when the same penalty gets missed. And everybody goes, see, the referees aren't calling the standard. Well, no, they just missed the
Yeah.
penalty.
The margin for error is a lot tighter.
The
That's for
margin for
sure.
error is a lot tighter. The pressure, everything's ramped up, and the focus on that missed call becomes so much more magnified.
Right.
But the last thing referees want to do is miss penalties. And they're on a conference call,
Yeah.
the first day of playoffs saying the exact same things being told to them. You guys know the standard, call the standard, and we'll support you. And if you go back to, 20 years ago, you'd never see a penalty in overtime in the playoffs.
No.
Now we see it all the time.
There'd
Referees
be
go out there
mayhem, beheadings, and you'd be like, "Wow, like, should we call
for
that?"
sure. For sure. Guys actually call penalties in overtime now. Guys call way more penalties in playoff games than they did 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's good because you went back to, letting them play, but letting them play. The band Rush,
Yeah.
I'm a Canadian as well, and they have a
Yeah.
great lyric where if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. So, not deciding and so-called letting the players decide, that's not fair.
Yeah.
That's not fair because then you're just letting the lowest common denominator decide. If it's a penalty, call it. And I know that's what they're told.
Interesting. So you've now moved up to, well, I would call it the booth, but it definitely looks like your house from here.
Yeah.
So you've been away from the game as far as the on ice product goes for a couple of years. How has being away from the game not changed, but what have you seen different? It's kind of like the eye in the sky, I guess, when you see a guy sitting up in the press box, you see everything develop, you see a lot more.
Yeah.
How has that changed? And I guess now that you're looking at, are there things that you're noticing that maybe you'd like to see change in the game, or you're happy that they're at where they are?
Well, that it's funny you say that. People ask me that a lot, and I think if I could have stepped away and done this for 2 years in the middle of my career and then come back to on ice,
Yeah.
I'd have been a better referee because much like people talk about golf, it's not a game of perfect.
Oh, tell me
And
about it.
one of my close friends always had this saying, which becomes even much more relevant now that now I'm just watching games totally impartial. He said, "Don't miss a blatant penalty. Don't miss a blatant penalty because that's what pisses everybody off.
Hmm.
But also, don't be the only buddy in the building to see a penalty."
Gotcha.
Meaning, you know what? If you're nitpicking and trying to find a perfect penalty, and
Yeah.
two guys go in the corner, and you say, "Oh, I saw that stick just get his waist a little bit," but there's no reaction, and the player plays on, and it's just a hockey play. Those are the kind of penalties that frustrate people. Frustrates everybody. The puck carrier is not expecting a penalty there. He wasn't fouled. Hockey people don't expect that.
Hmm.
So you know what? You want to call penalties that are penalties that have an effect on the play. And I think we've all been guilty in our career trying to be too perfect and going, yeah, that's a penalty according to the rule book, but maybe it wasn't. And don't miss the obvious ones. Like just don't miss them
Yeah.
because that's what everybody points to and says, what about that penalty? You missed that blatant call. And those haunt you. You just go, why didn't I see that? Or what was I looking at? And it just people think you leave the rink and it's just all you just forget about it. You don't.
Yeah.
It
No
stays
way.
with you. You lie in bed, you can't sleep, you're staring at the ceiling because you just want to be perfect. And I realize now that it's not a game of perfect.
So there's four guys on the ice now. There is anyway. I was
Yep.
watching a game. Oh, I want to say like 2 nights ago. I mean, it's this. This has been kind of great. I've been preparing for our little interview here, and I saw a play, and I'm sure this has been asked before. Obviously, the referees are the ones that call the actual penalties, and I know that linesmen are able to maybe suggest if there's something. And because hockey is definitely a game of sight lines, and you're going to miss something that it could be blatant, but you're not in the right sight line to see it, either
Yep.
of the referees. Do you think, or I don't know, maybe this is going to be the wrong way to word this, but is there a way to give, and maybe there is already, the linesman, like, is there more? Can there be like, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? More responsibility given to a linesman to say like, "Hey, like we saw this. I know we can't call it." Like, can they say, "Hey, listen, I know you were over here and saw this happen, but there was this blatant play that maybe we all saw, but
Yep.
we know based on where you were situated that you probably didn't see it, and you were, because there's obviously something else going on." Like, is
Sure.
is there an opportunity for the
Yeah.
for the linesman to be more involved as well?
More so now than ever. Back most of my career, you put your arm up, you called the penalty, you lived with it. You missed a penalty, you lived with it, unless it was a major penalty. So linesmen can call major penalties. They have to wait till the
Okay.
stoppage. They come to
Right.
you right away and say, "Hey, this is what I saw. it should be a major penalty. Though, I mean, they're lifesavers when they do that. You know, you
No
just
kidding.
because there's no worse feeling than a guy lying on the ice, bloodied on the ice, and you're going, I have no idea what happened, and one of the linesmen comes over and says, "Hey, come over here. We got to talk." And he goes, "I saw what happened," and he tells you. I mean, it makes it great, and
Yeah.
there's nothing nefarious about that. They're allowed to make calls if it's a major penalty. When it comes to a minor penalty, so you'll see guys now. You never used to see guys huddle. Now you get the whole team huddling because they want to get the call right. And as long as you get the call right, so the way I think, and I'm not on staff anymore, but if you're going to make an egregious mistake, you're going to hear about it. You're going to be criticized. If you can fix that egregious mistake and get the call right, you're still going to get criticized for missing it to begin with.
Hmm.
But it's tough to argue with getting the call right,
Absolutely.
right? So if you look at goalie interference, for example, you'll give a goal, or I guess that's probably one of the best examples, or even like a loose puck or something that goes
Hmm.
something that can't be reviewed. Goalie interference can be reviewed, like a loose puck where the goalie thought he had it, but they poked it in and all that, and you give a goal and the team goes bananas. There was one 2 nights ago where it was a delayed penalty, and the team actually touched the puck right before the team scored, but the referee from where he was standing didn't see it. So the whistle went for the goal. Sorry, not the whistle. He pointed for the goal. The team who was about to receive the penalty got scored on, went nuts, and said, "Hey, we touched the puck. Like we didn't just deflect it. We actually propelled
Had
it."
possession. Yeah.
And the four guys got together, and I believe the linesman really played a role there. And they said, "Yeah, it's what." And ultimately, they got the call right. They said no goal, assessed the minor penalty, and that was the right call. And I think that's really important. Now, I've seen guys take away penalties. Now, I'm not a big fan of taking away a penalty, except every now and
I mean, if
then.
it's the right call, though, I think you'd feel a lot
Right,
better knowing that it what shouldn't have been a penalty in the first place.
right. And we're not talking about when it sticks in the guy's midsection and the referee calls hooking and linesman around goes, from where I was standing, he didn't really hook him that much. We're
Yeah.
not talking about that. We're talking about where, for example, the referee calls a tripping penalty and the guy toe picked and the stick missed him by 3 feet.
Yeah.
And everybody's going, like, stick didn't even come anywhere near him. And the
Yeah.
linesman slides in and they get together and they talk and they go, listen. And I think the conversation would sort of go like this. I'm a linesman. I'm not telling you what to do, but if you want my help, I can guarantee you the stick was nowhere near the player.
Yeah.
And then the referee would probably look around at the other two guys and they'd kind of nod and say, yeah. So then you know what? You do what's right. You do
Right.
what's right. People are already to look at you and go, well, what are you looking at to make a call that was so bad? So you already know that people are gonna, be
You're gonna hear it
criticizing
anyway.
you. They're
Yeah.
gonna criticizing you, but at least if you get the call right, then the team doesn't end up scoring in the power play and it's compounded the mistake.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think, and you've got review now. When I was on ice, we never had the review for the double minor high sticking. You can rescind that if it was the puck or a follow through or friendly fire. We never had the ability to call a major penalty and drop it to two or rescind it all altogether. I mean, those are all great innovations that I think make the game better. Make the game better because when I started, we didn't have a review for a puck crossing the goal line, and you waved off a goal and said no goal, and millions of people saw the puck cross the goal line. And you're the only guy on the ice who didn't see it. It's
Yeah.
not fair to the game. It's not fair to the game.
No.
So let's be fair to the game and get the call right.
So I got a couple more, but I do want to touch on, you brought up the high stick, the double minor.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that, I mean, aside from you having to call that as a penalty and the whole, if there's blood, that's the extra two, like, is
Yep.
that maybe one of the worst, maybe written penalties that exists? Because I mean, if you high stick a guy
Mhm.
and he doesn't bleed,
Mhm.
he gets 2 minutes. But
Right.
if you happen to have, and we've seen it, there's been plenty where it just happens to nick just ever so slightly, I'm gonna get more blood on a hangnail the next day,
Right.
and all of a sudden there's like the smallest droplet of blood, and now it's a 4 minute. Is
Right.
that something that you maybe would like to see? Like, is there a way to fix that penalty?
I don't think there is, and but also the misconception has to be blood. It doesn't have to be blood. It says
Okay.
injury.
Okay.
So a guy could be missing a tooth and no blood.
Right.
A guy could have a massive, he get hit in the face and get this massive welt that looks like, Fred Flintstone
Mhm.
when the big welt comes out on his face. You can call a double minor for an injury. Doesn't have to be blood.
But
Um,
even still, like, technically,
sure.
that'd
And
be an
I
injury,
and
and
I know
would that get called 100% of the time still then?
I'd like to say it should be, but blood gets called 100% of the time.
I just because it
But
it 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 eats I know me anyway, and I know a lot of other people, it's the smallest one. I mean, I'm all for I guess when I look at it, and I don't wanna get into the whole situation, but you to look at, like, suspensions for the intent to injure, not the actual
yeah,
injury.
right.
There's one that's obviously quite popular in our neck of the woods, but, um, I I I just hate the idea that, and this is more on the suspension, and it's not you guys,
Yeah.
but that they are penalizing more for the actual injury than the intent. The high sticking one is the one that kinda sticks out to me, not
Right.
trying to
And
pun in there.
I think it would be tough to really make it any more equitable than it is. So they got rid of the major penalty for high staking, because
Mhm.
what's the difference between a 5-minute major or a match penalty?
Right.
So now it's basically there's three things. You high stick a guy, you injure a guy accidentally, or you do it intentionally, and it's a match penalty.
Right.
So what they're saying is, if you just get your stick up, there's one tonight where a guy got, I believe it was Evander Kane. He got his stick up and got the guy in the visor.
Yeah.
He didn't mean to do it, and that's a 2-minute penalty. Now, if you hit the guy in the face and he bleeds, I know you're talking about speck of blood, but if let's say you hit him hard, there was one where the Oilers drew the penalty.
Yeah.
Hyman got hit.
Right.
I mean, he was zippered open. He was
Right.
bleeding. Um, to me, that needs to be more than 2 minutes. Um,
Like, I don't think
the-
anyone's debating that. I
right.
like,
So my
the
question to
obvious
you is,
injury. Yeah.
where do you draw the line?
Yeah, and I think that's the question, like, is there I think that was my question is there a way to amend that or to fix it in a way? And there probably isn't, I guess,
I
is
don't
the
think
answer.
there is,
Okay.
and if there was, I'm sure people smarter than us would have thought of that. But there just needs to. I mean, you just need to draw the line somewhere, right? Right, like a speed limit. I mean, you're doing 50.
Yeah.
So, what if I do 51? Well, you're over. I mean, there needs to be a line drawn somewhere in the sand.
Yeah.
And
No, that's fair.
they drew it at injury. And is it perfect? It's not, but it's as good as you're going to get right now, I think.
Yeah, well, okay, I like that answer. So, 2 more here. We talk about, you've got your referee brethren, we've got everything. There's a lot of relationships in the game. But you guys see a lot more than we get to see. You hear a lot more, and you're building a relationship with the players as much as their teammates are. Who
Correct.
are a couple of, like, and I'm not going to include referees in this one, but who are some players that you formed a pretty decent relationship with? Maybe not necessarily for the right reasons, but you have a good relationship with them for whatever reason on the ice.
Well, this might sound like I'm not telling the truth, but I mean, I like to think I never held a grudge personally. I felt it was counterproductive because as a referee, you want to make your own job. And I don't mean taking the easy way out, but
Right.
you want to do everything you can to make your job as easy as possible. And having a feud with a player or holding a grudge with a player or coach doesn't make your job easy,
No
because
kidding.
it's gas on the fire, game after game after game. I always so the players you talk with the most are probably the tough guys, because they're always out on the ice, and you're always trying to build rapport with them, relationship, hoping that like, I mean, I used to use a line sometimes when they'd be out, they trying to accost. I mean, hey, do me a favor. Wes McCauley's in your game tomorrow night. Go ruin his game. But
Keep keep
don't
my
do anything
job easier
tonight.
tonight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't do anything tonight. Save it for tomorrow night. Ruin someone else's game, but don't ruin my game. And I'd say it tongue in cheek,
Oh,
just
sure.
laugh, kind of laughing, right? But you always want to talk with those guys, because when things do hit the fan and there's a brawl going or whatever, you're not going to stop them doing what they have to do, but they might listen to you. They might respect you and say, okay, you know what, you're done. I need you to get off the ice. Like, we need to, like, clean this thing up, and I need your help here. And they're usually pretty good about it. The other guys are captains. You're always
Mhm.
dealing with the captains, right? And through the years, I mean, as a young referee, new in the league. I mean, I dealt with Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux and Mark Messier, and I mean, man, that was intimidating. I mean, it really was, because these guys were only 4 or 5 years older than me, but they're in the NHL
They're
at
doing some
18.
different things.
But
Yeah.
no, but they're in the NHL at 18, right?
Yeah.
So I'm only like 14 when they're in the NHL, and I'm still a kid, and I'm you're watching these guys, and then now you're 25 years old and they're 29, and the age of, but you still remember them from when you were a kid. So
Right.
like that's intimidating. And then you're in the league for a number of years, and guys come in the league like Ovechkin and Crosby and McDavid, and you're always building rapport with the captains. You're always, even when they come over when they're mad at you, you always want to let them vent.
Hmm.
You let them vent, and you just say, "Listen, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. Unfortunately, you don't get a vote. I'm judge and jury, but I hear what you're saying." And a lot of people, a lot of captains will respect that. They go, "I just wanted to be heard. Like, I just wanted to vent and tell you what I think." And they might disagree with you, or sometimes they do agree with you. And there's some, great guy. I mean, most of them are great guys. You know, Gretzky, Lemieux, Joe Sakic, Nick Lidstrom. I mean, I'm going to leave somebody out here, but
I mean, there's a few players that have played in the NHL. You're gonna probably miss a ton. That's for
yeah,
sure.
no, I'm talking guys that were captains though
Oh,
that
okay.
came
Yeah.
to you during your career. I mean,
Right. Right.
Trevor
Yeah.
Linden, just guys that if you respected them, I think you had to earn their respect, but they gave it to you back.
Mhm.
And as mad as they would be sometimes coming over, they never really crossed the line. They didn't. There was no personal attacks. There was no um, critique of how they thought you were as a referee. They're just talking about the one call they were upset about. And sometimes you battle with guys half your career
Yeah.
until they finally accepted you. But they never really disrespected you. They just kind of battled with you, and then they'd come over and they were laughing, and they'd laugh, and they'd come over. Yeah,
They're hoping to
I'm
get
back
their way
again.
so that you don't call what you just called, or that you do
Exactly,
call something that they think you missed.
and that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
They're trying to. I mean, referees really are the only people in the game that care about the integrity of the rules, right? Everybody else would be happy if you ignored the rules for them, just
Yeah.
not for the other team. So you've got to remember that they're always trying to get an edge for their team. And as long as you remember that and don't let them play those games, you don't debate them. You explain the rule and you go. And the coaches are great for that. They try and debate you. And you say, "Listen, I'm not here to debate. I'm here to explain the rule." And then you get out of there pretty quick. And they can't chase you because they don't have skates on. So,
No kidding. Yeah.
yeah,
You can make a beeline.
yeah.
I think I could probably ask you about 100 more questions, and maybe we'll get you back on at some point. Maybe after the playoffs, get Ted on here because I know he's missing out. We've had Dave Jackson from ESPN, former NHL referee, amazing guy to chat with. Dave, I have one question, and I hope you can answer this honest and truthfully before we let you go. Does the NHL have it out for the Vancouver Canucks? This is more of a clickbait one, so I mean, if you wouldn't mind creating a great clip for me, I'd really appreciate it.
No, and I hate clickbait because I get burned on that sometimes when
Yeah,
people
the
don't
next thing you
listen.
know, you're like, I'm never
When
gonna talk to you again.
when
Sorry.
people don't listen to my full comments on what I said,
Yeah.
and I'll give an example, and that's that
Well,
one
Bo
quote.
Horvat's a great example this week.
Yeah, exactly, and one quote. Um, as I said just 2 minutes ago, you always want to make your job. You want to set yourself up so that your job goes smooth and easy. No referee I ever worked with ever had it out for any team. Simple as that. Because you'd be cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Mhm.
You're um you are rated, you're judged, you get playoff games based on your consistency and your fairness. And if you let a prejudice um overwhelm or override your judgment, you wouldn't be getting playoffs. You'd be out of playoffs, and pretty soon you'd be out of a job because the league would not tolerate that. So unequivocally, no, nobody has it out for any team.
He has to go with the classy answer, man.
I'm
Well,
giving you the I'm giving you the
I
honest
tried
answer.
Canucks. I tried Canucks fans, but he gave me the honest answer. Dave, thank you so much for coming by. Like I said, I seriously probably have another 10 questions, but at the same time, I do want to value your time. We've had Dave Jackson from ESPN on our PP1 podcast on Crier Media. Dave, you've got a busy schedule coming up. I'm sure the playoffs are going to be busy for you. You're going to be full on with ESPN coming up.
ESPN's doing 4 games a night starting Monday, so it's
Oh,
gonna
wow.
be busy. I'm gonna have a lot of hockey in front of me.
Excellent. I'm sure your life's got to be a lot like it's pretty cool, I guess, to be able to call it as an analyst now, as opposed to like they're coming to you for the expert analysis,
Well,
on a play.
I,
Oh, well,
yeah, after the call's been made, so
sure.
I'm seldom wrong, even except on judgment calls
Very humble
because
too, folks.
well, that's not what I meant. What I meant
I
was
get
it's
what you
much
mean.
easier. It's much
Gotcha.
easier to not be wrong when you get to see 6 different replays of the thing
That's
before you
true.
have to give your comment, right?
That's true.
Uh, the ones I do get wrong sometimes are the goalie interference because ultimately someone's still making a judgment on it.
Hmm.
It's not puck over the glass, did it or did it not hit something. I mean, it's still a judgment. So I try to give my what I try to do is I try to explain the rule, explain the criteria, explain the interpretation, but then it's still up to let's wait for the call and see ultimately how they saw it.
Yeah.
And but but it is really cool being the guy they come to. But really, I'm just people want to know like I'm not really a referee analyst. I'm just a rules analyst,
Yeah.
and I explain the rule because sometimes the referees make the right call, and I still get blown up on Twitter, and they go, you're just covering for them." I'm like, no, I'm not. I mean, they made the right call, and if it's a
Right.
blatantly wrong call, I'm not going to defend it, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to pile on either. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Who does
just
that help?
there's just too much negativity. So
Hmm.
I just try and stay down the middle and explain the rule and let the fans make up their own judgment as to whether they followed the rule and the
Yeah.
criteria.
It's definitely added to the fan experience having officials now, basically in every league. It seems like now. So I know it's made it a lot more fun for hockey and football, and uh, I mean those are the two sports that I follow, and it's definitely made the experience a lot more enjoyable. Dave Jackson, thank you so much for coming by. I appreciate it. You've got the tie off now, and I can hopefully relax and have. I don't think you're going to be a coffee guy at this time, but
Yeah,
enjoy whatever else you've got this evening. Thank you so
right on.
much.
Well, thanks for having me. We'll do
Not a
it again.
problem.